Now, to discuss this issue with us from Tehran is Ms. Sitare Sadiqi, political commentator and co-host of Twice Told Tales podcast. Thanks a million, Ms. Sitare, for being with us, and condolences to all of the Iranian people for the loss of their loved ones in this terrorist attacks. Now, the Iranian Tasnim news agency reported that the Tajik terrorist Rahmatullah Norozaf, the perpetrator of the terrorist attack in the shrine of Ahmad bin Musa in Shiraz, was associated with one of the leaders of Daesh, ISIS, via the internet. Then he went to Turkey for operational cooperation with the group Daesh, and then practically he became an official member in it before coming back and actually performing this act of terrorism. How is Iran dealing with this new wave of terrorist threat that is being initiated from neighboring, supposedly friendly nations or countries?
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your condolence message. Well, as you know, and this second attack on the same shrine in Shiraz was reportedly plotted as a revenge for the execution and arrest of the perpetrators of the previous attack. So, as you can see, Iran has been seriously pursuing, identifying, and tracking these terrorists and punishing them with capital punishment, and trying to find the masterminds behind it. So I think Iran will continue to do the same thing, and Iran is going to try to identify the masterminds and the teams that are working with these foreigners that have been influenced by Wahhabi Takfiri terrorism mentality and ideology. As you know, Iran has always been a leading force against terrorism and in fighting terrorism. It was usually outside its borders, but because foreign agencies, and as you said, like there are intelligence agencies of the US and UK and other countries behind this, and they have been working very hard to create instability and insecurity inside the country so that they can create more chaos, and they have always been funding and arming and sponsoring different terrorist groups, including the MEK, including elements of Al-Qaeda, including elements of ISIS, and they want to create instability everywhere in the region, including Iran.
Well, Sitare, the mastermind behind the terrorist Shah Cheragh attack, they had multiple goals in mind, most important of which is religious and ethnic differences and discrimination between neighboring countries, between them and Iran. This just straightforward puts a number of foreign intelligence agencies on the spot as beneficiaries of such attacks on Iranian religious sites. Is that having its toll with the Iranian communities? Meaning, is it actually achieving what it's supposed to achieve?
Well, yeah, that's what you can see that they have been pursuing. I mean, it has always been the goal of the imperialist powers, especially the British government and also the US, to create discord and sow discord among different religious denominations and ethnic groups so that they can rule over and control and manipulate this nation. But because the victims of terrorism, including ISIS, including Wahhabism, have not been from one particular religious denomination, and they have been from the Sunnis and Shias and Christians and even other groups of very different ethnic groups and religious groups. People here understand that this is not really about sectarian violence. It's not sectarian. It's an act of terrorism with victims that can come from any religious or ethnic backgrounds. For example, this particular shrine sounds to be a Shia shrine, and I mean it's known as a Shia shrine, but you could see there are images of Sunni Muslims praying inside the same shrine. So it was respected by Muslims of many different religious backgrounds. So they are trying very hard. That's what the propaganda is aimed at. But I would say because Iranian people have seen how terrorists have taken their tolls from many different religious denominations and ethnic groups, they do understand that this is not really about sectarian differences, and in that regard, I would say the propaganda has not been very successful. Of course, propaganda always manages to influence a minority, at least. And but this is not what you would see in the society or in the discussion among ordinary people on the streets, or when you go to work or anywhere. People are not talking about the act of terrorism as something that has to do with sectarian differences.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is clear that the enemies of the Islamic Republic of Iran have drawn up a multi-layered project to make Iran insecure, while also suffocating the people of Iran with the illegal punitive measures known to the world as sanctions. For sure, the Islamic Republic has a strategy to maybe deal with these attacks. However, what if this multi-layered project takes the form of internal unrest again, the likes of what happened last year in 2022? How will the Iranian people themselves deal with such a meddling?
You know, Iranians have a history of how foreign meddling into their countries has always been detrimental, has always been very hostile, and has been an attempt to suppress democracy, to suppress the public's will and public's or Iranians' interests. It started with the 1953 coup against government of Mossadegh, which was perpetrated by the CIA and MI6 and toppled the government that was elected by the people, or that was supported by the people. But it did not end there. And ever since the revolution, this meddling has accelerated. And as you said, and these sanctions, the crippling sanctions, are a very clear sign of how U.S. and European countries meddling into the country, into Iran's affairs, have been just suffocating Iranians, making ordinary life, or at least that's what they are trying to do. Because despite all these pressures, despite all these sanctions, and despite the threats of terrorism and insecurity, Iranians are flourishing. Yes, they have grievances. Yes, they have different problems like any other country, but they're still continuing and supporting their establishments and supporting the democracy that they have. So there is this concern that all these insecurities and the security threats that are happening are aimed at creating or paving the ground for another round of riots inside Iran and, chaos and unrest. But people, I mean, even those who fell for the propaganda last year have seen how these so-called opposition groups outside, the so-called opposition coalition or whatever they called it, has already collapsed, and they are exposing themselves. Like, the members of those coalitions are exposing themselves. They have seen how they stole money from Iranian expats as well as from Iranian frozen assets held by the U.S. They stole that money, and the only thing that happened was that their bank accounts got fatter and their mansions got bigger. But
we got the point of what is happening and how the Iranian people will actually stand in the face and against this propagated unrest.